Entire History of the United States of America 1. Introduction. Hey there. Today, we're diving into the entire history of the United States of America from its beginnings as a land inhabited by diverse indigenous peoples to its rise as a global superpower. This is going to be an incredible journey through time. We'll talk about the key moments that shaped the nation, from its fight for independence, through the challenges of war and inequality, to the innovations and achievements that define it today. But don't worry, this isn't your high school history class. We're keeping it simple, clear, and packed with fascinating stories that make history come alive. By the end of this video, you'll have a new appreciation for how the U.S. became the country it is today and maybe even some insights into where it's heading next. So, buckle up and let's get started. Indigenous peoples in the pre-colonial era, long before the United States became a nation or even a set of colonies, the land was home to millions of indigenous peoples. These groups thrived for thousands of years, creating diverse and sophisticated societies, each with unique cultures, traditions, and innovations. The diversity of Native American tribes, indigenous peoples, were far from a single, unified group. Instead, they represented hundreds of tribes, each adapted to their environments. From the dense forests of the Northeast to the arid deserts of the Southwest, Native American communities built their lives around the land, developing languages, religions, and political systems that varied widely. These tribes were deeply connected to nature, relying on sustainable practices for farming, hunting, and fishing. They developed rich oral histories, passing down stories, knowledge, and traditions from one generation to the next. Advanced societies in pre-colonial America. Some Native American groups formed highly advanced societies that rivaled civilizations in Europe and Asia during their time. Here are a few notable examples. The Mississippians. The Mississippian culture, thriving from around 800 to 1600 AD, was one of the most sophisticated pre-Columbian societies. Centered around the Mississippi River and its tributaries, they built large, organized cities, with Cahokia, near present-day St. Louis, being the largest. Cahokia was a bustling urban center with massive earthen mounds used for ceremonies, housing, and governance. The Mississippians practiced advanced agriculture, growing crops like maize, and maintained extensive trade networks across the continent. The ancestral Puebloans in the Southwest. The ancestral Puebloans, formerly known as the Anasazi, created remarkable cliff dwellings and pueblos made of stone and adobe. These structures, such as those in Mesa Verde and Chaco Canyon, show their ingenuity in architecture and community planning. They built complex irrigation systems to grow crops like corn, beans, and squash in a harsh desert environment. The Puebloans were also skilled astronomers, aligning their structures with celestial events. The Iroquois Confederacy in the Northeast. The Iroquois or Haudenosaunee formed a powerful confederacy of 5, later 6, nations, including the Mohawk, Oneida, and Seneca. Their system of governance, based on consensus and mutual respect, was highly advanced and is often credited with influencing the democratic ideals later adopted by the United States. Known as the Great Law of Peace, their constitution promoted unity while respecting the autonomy of each nation. A rich legacy. These are just a few examples of the incredible societies that flourished in North America long before European contact. Native American communities were not static. They adapted, innovated, and thrived in diverse environments across the continent. Their achievements in agriculture, governance, and art leave a legacy that is often overlooked in mainstream history but remains vital to understanding the foundation of the land we now call the United States. Colonization and early settlements. 1492–1776. The era of colonization marked a turning point in history, as European explorers arrived in the Americas, leading to profound changes for both the indigenous peoples and the settlers. This period laid the foundation for what would eventually become the United States. Christopher Columbus and early European exploration. In 1492, Christopher Columbus, an Italian explorer sailing under the Spanish flag, arrived in the Caribbean, believing he had found a new route to Asia. His journey opened the door to European exploration and colonization in the Americas. Following Columbus, other explorers, like Hearn A tilde inverted exclamation mark and Court A tilde copyright S and Francisco Pizarro, ventured into the New World, leading to the Spanish conquest of vast regions in Central and South America. Other European powers, including England, France, and the Netherlands, began exploring and establishing colonies in North America. The Spanish focused on the South and West, while the French settled in parts of Canada and the Mississippi River Valley. The English, however, turned their attention to the eastern seaboard of what is now the United States. The establishment of colonies. Jamestown, 1607. Jamestown, located in present-day Virginia, was the first permanent English settlement in North America. Established in 1607 by the Virginia Company, the settlement faced numerous challenges, including harsh winters, disease, and conflicts with indigenous peoples. Despite these struggles, the colony survived, largely thanks to the cultivation of tobacco, which became a lucrative cash crop. Plymouth Colony, 1620. In 1620, the Pilgrims, a group of English separatists seeking religious freedom, arrived on the Mayflower and settled in Plymouth, Massachusetts. Before disembarking, they signed the Mayflower Compact, an early example of self-governance in the colonies. The Pilgrims initially struggled to survive but received help from local indigenous peoples, such as the Wampanoag, who taught them how to grow crops like corn and squash. These early settlements paved the way for the establishment of more colonies along the East Coast. The 13 colonies and their relationship with Britain. By the mid-1700s, there were 13 British colonies in North America, each with its own government, economy, and culture. These colonies were grouped into 3 regions. New England colonies, known for their Puritan roots, they had economies based on fishing, shipbuilding, and small-scale farming. Middle colonies, diverse in population and religion, with economies driven by farming and trade. Southern colonies, dominated by large plantations that grew cash crops like tobacco, rice, and indigo, relying heavily on enslaved labor. While the colonies enjoyed relative autonomy in local governance, their relationship with Britain grew tense. Britain imposed taxes and trade restrictions, such as the Stamp Act and Navigation Acts, to control colonial economies and recover debts from European wars. This led to growing resentment and a desire for greater independence among the colonists. The cultural and economic impacts of slavery. A dark chapter of colonization was the rise of slavery, which played a crucial role in the economy of the colonies, particularly in the South. The transatlantic slave trade brought millions of Africans to the Americas, where they were forced to work on plantations under brutal conditions. The reliance on enslaved labor allowed the colonies to produce vast quantities of goods for export, fueling economic growth. However, it also created deep social divisions and set the stage for future conflicts over race and equality. Slavery wasn't just an economic system, it also had cultural impacts, as African traditions, music, and food began to blend with colonial culture, leaving a lasting legacy. A world transformed. The colonization period was marked by dramatic change in new settlements, economic growth, and cultural exchanges, but also conflict, exploitation, and the displacement of indigenous peoples. By 1776, the 13 colonies were not just outposts of the British Empire but thriving communities with a growing sense of identity and independence, setting the stage for the American Revolution. The American Revolution and Independence, 1776–1783. The American Revolution was a pivotal period in history, marking the transformation of 13 British colonies into an independent nation. Rooted in tensions over governance and freedom, this era saw monumental events that continue to define the United States today. Causes of the Revolution. The Revolution was fueled by growing dissatisfaction among the colonists with British rule. Key causes included taxation without representation after the costly French and Indian War, 1754–1763. Britain imposed new taxes on the colonies to recover its debts. Acts like the Stamp Act, 1765, which taxed paper goods, and the Townshend Acts, 1767, which taxed imports like tea and glass, angered colonists. They argued that, as British subjects, they should not be taxed without representation in Parliament, a principle they summed up as no taxation without representation. The Boston Tea Party, 1773, tensions escalated with the Tea Act, which gave the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in the colonies. In protest, a group of colonists disguised as Native Americans boarded British ships in Boston Harbor and dumped an entire shipment of tea into the water. This act of defiance, known as the Boston Tea Party, provoked a harsh response from Britain, including the Intolerable Acts, which further restricted colonial freedoms. These events, combined with growing resentment of British military presence and interference, ignited calls for independence. Key events of the Revolution: the Declaration of Independence, 1776. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, primarily drafted by Thomas Jefferson. This historic document proclaimed the colony's separation from Britain and asserted the principles of liberty, equality, and self-governance. It famously declared that all men are created equal and have unalienable rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Major battles of the Revolution: the American Revolution unfolded over several years, with key battles shaping its outcome. The Battle of Bunker Hill, 1775, one of the first major battles, demonstrating the colonists' resolve despite British victory. The Battle of Saratoga, 1777, a turning point in the war, as the American victory convinced France to join the fight against Britain. The Siege of Yorktown, 1781, the final major battle, where British General Cornwallis surrendered to General George Washington, effectively ending the war. The Treaty of Paris, 1783, after years of fighting, Britain recognized the independence of the United States with the signing of the Treaty of Paris on September 3, 1783. The treaty established the boundaries of the new nation, extending from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River. Formation of the United States as an independent nation. The conclusion of the Revolution was not just a military victory but the birth of a new nation. The United States faced the monumental task of building a government that reflected the ideals of the Revolution. In 1787, the U.S. Constitution was drafted, creating a framework for a democratic republic. The first president, George Washington, was inaugurated in 1789, setting the tone for leadership in the young nation. The revolution also inspired movements for freedom and democracy worldwide, proving that ordinary people could challenge powerful empires and shape their destinies. Legacy of the Revolution. The American Revolution wasn't just a fight for independence, it was a fight for principles that continue to guide the United States today: liberty, equality, and the pursuit of happiness. While these ideals were not fully realized at the time, they set the foundation for the country's ongoing journey toward a more perfect union. Building the nation, 1783–1860. After achieving independence, the United States faced the challenge of creating a stable and unified nation. The period from 1783 to 1860 was marked by political innovation, territorial expansion, and profound challenges, laying the foundation for the modern United States. Adoption of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. Following independence, the United States initially operated under the Articles of Confederation, a loose framework that left the federal government weak and ineffective. Recognizing the need for a stronger central authority, delegates met at the Constitutional Convention in 1787. The U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1788, it established a federal system of government with three branches: executive, legislative, and judicial. This framework balanced power and ensured checks and balances. The Bill of Rights, added in 1791, the first 10 amendments to the Constitution guaranteed essential freedoms, including freedom of speech, religion, and the press, as well as protections against government overreach. These rights became a cornerstone of American democracy. George Washington's presidency and the early republic. George Washington, unanimously elected as the first president in 1789, set important precedents for the new nation. Establishing the executive branch, Washington formed the first cabinet, including key figures like Alexander Hamilton, Secretary of the Treasury, and Thomas Jefferson, Secretary of State. Neutrality in foreign affairs. Washington advocated for neutrality, avoiding entanglement in European conflicts. His farewell address warned against political factions and foreign alliances, advice that resonated for decades. Peaceful transition of power. Washington voluntarily stepped down after 2 terms, setting a precedent for Democratic leadership. The early republic was also a time of growing political division. The Federalists, led by Hamilton, supported a strong central government, while the Democratic Republicans, led by Jefferson, championed states' rights and individual liberties. Westward expansion, the Louisiana Purchase, and Manifest Destiny. As the United States grew, so did its desire to expand westward, fueled by the belief in manifest destiny, the idea that Americans were destined to spread across the continent. The Louisiana Purchase, 1803, under President Thomas Jefferson, the U.S. purchased the Louisiana Territory from France for $15 million, doubling the nation's size. This vast land, stretching from the Mississippi River to the Rocky Mountains, was explored by Lewis and Clark, who mapped the region and strengthened claims to the western frontier. Manifest destiny and westward migration. Throughout the 19th century, settlers pushed westward in search of land and opportunity. Trails like the Oregon Trail and the Santa Fe Trail became vital routes for pioneers. However, this expansion often came at great cost to Native American communities, leading to conflicts and displacement. Conflicts with Native Americans and the Trail of Tears. The U.S. government's expansionist policies frequently clashed with the interests of Native American tribes. Treaties were often broken, and indigenous peoples were forcibly removed from their ancestral lands. Indian Removal Act, 1830, signed by President Andrew Jackson. This law allowed the government to relocate Native American tribes from the southeast to lands west of the Mississippi River. This led to the Trail of Tears, a forced march in which thousands of Cherokee and other tribes suffered and died while being relocated to present-day Oklahoma. Continued resistance. Despite displacement, many Native American tribes resisted U.S. expansion. Leaders like Tecumseh of the Shawnee and Sitting Bull of the Vacotas who fought to defend their lands and cultures, though they faced overwhelming odds. A nation in transition. By 1860, the United States had grown dramatically in size, wealth, and influence. However, this growth brought new challenges, including tensions over slavery, economic disparities, and conflicts with Native Americans. The foundations of the modern United States had been laid, but the nation was already on a path toward deeper divisions that would culminate in the Civil War. The Civil War and Reconstruction, 1861–1877, the Civil War was a defining moment in American history, a clash between two visions of the nation, one rooted in freedom and equality, and the other in slavery and state sovereignty. Following the war, the Reconstruction era aimed to rebuild the fractured country and address the lingering issues of civil rights, tensions over slavery, and the causes of the Civil War. By the mid-19th century, the United States was deeply divided over the issue of slavery. The southern states relied on enslaved labor to sustain their agricultural economies, while many in the North opposed slavery on moral and economic grounds. The expansion of slavery. As the U.S. expanded westward, debates arose about whether new territories would allow slavery. The Missouri Compromise, 1820, and the Kansas-Nebraska Act, 1854, attempted to balance free and slave states but only heightened tensions. States' rights versus federal authority. Southern states argued for states' rights, claiming the federal government had no authority to interfere with their decision to uphold slavery. This conflict between state and federal power became a core issue leading to secession. Abraham Lincoln's election. The election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860, on an anti-slavery platform, was the final straw for many southern states. Believing their way of life was under threat, 11 states seceded from the Union and formed the Confederate States of America, led by President Jefferson Davis. Key events of the Civil War. The Civil War began in 1861 with the Confederate attack on Fort Sumter in South Carolina. Over the next 4 years, the nation endured one of the bloodiest conflicts in its history. Major battles. Battle of Antietam, 1862, the bloodiest single-day battle in American history, resulting in over 22,000 casualties. Battle of Gettysburg, 1863, a turning point in the war. This Union victory halted the Confederacy's advance into the North. Sherman's march to the sea, 1864, General William Tecumseh Sherman led a devastating campaign through Georgia, targeting both Confederate forces and civilian infrastructure. The Emancipation Proclamation, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, declaring freedom for all enslaved people in Confederate-held territories. While it didn't immediately free all enslaved individuals, it shifted the focus of the war to include the abolition of slavery as a central goal and allowed African Americans to join the Union Army. The end of the war. The Civil War ended in April 1865 when Confederate General Robert E. Lee surrendered to Union General Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. Just days later, President Lincoln was assassinated, leaving the nation to grapple with the challenges of reunification without his leadership. Aftermath of the war, Reconstruction and the struggle for civil rights. Reconstruction, 1865–1877, was a period of rebuilding the South and integrating formerly enslaved people into society as free citizens. However, it was fraught with challenges. The 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. 13th Amendment, 1865, abolished slavery in the United States. 14th Amendment, 1868, granted citizenship and equal protection under the law to all individuals born or naturalized in the U.S., including formerly enslaved people. 15th Amendment, 1870, gave African American men the right to vote. Challenges of Reconstruction. The federal government established programs, like the Freedmen's Bureau, to assist formerly enslaved people with education, employment, and housing. Southern states resisted these changes, enacting black codes to restrict the rights of African Americans and relying on groups like the Ku Klux Klan to terrorize black communities. The Compromise of 1877. Reconstruction officially ended with the Compromise of 1877, in which federal troops were withdrawn from the South. This marked the beginning of the Jim Crow era, where segregation and disenfranchisement became widespread, reversing many of the gains made during Reconstruction. Legacy of the Civil War and Reconstruction. The Civil War preserved the Union and ended slavery, but Reconstruction revealed how deeply rooted racial inequality was in American society. The struggle for civil rights and equality would continue. Industrialization and expansion, 1877–1914. The period between 1877 and 1914 was transformative for the United States. It marked rapid industrial growth, technological innovation, and significant social changes as the country emerged as a global economic power. This era also saw profound challenges, including urbanization, mass immigration, and a growing divide between the wealthy and the working class. The rise of industry and major innovations. The United States experienced an unprecedented industrial boom during this period, driven by technological advancements and the expansion of industries like steel, railroads, and electricity. Railroads. The expansion of the transcontinental railroad network revolutionized transportation and commerce. Railroads connected distant regions of the country, facilitating the movement of goods and people. This infrastructure allowed industries to access raw materials and distribute products nationwide, fueling economic growth. Steel industry. The Bessemer process, which made steel production more efficient, played a critical role in building infrastructure such as bridges, skyscrapers, and railways. Industrialists like Andrew Carnegie dominated the steel industry, making vast fortunes and transforming cities like Pittsburgh into industrial hubs. Electricity. The invention and widespread adoption of electricity, pioneered by figures like Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla, revolutionized daily life and industry. Innovations such as the electric light bulb, electric motors, and power distribution systems transformed urban areas and increased industrial productivity. urbanization and immigration. As industries grew, so did cities. The U.S. became a magnet for immigrants seeking economic opportunities, contributing to rapid urbanization. Urban growth cities like New York, Chicago, and Detroit expanded rapidly as millions of Americans and immigrants moved in search of jobs. Overcrowded neighborhoods, known as tenements, often house working-class families in poor conditions, leading to significant social challenges. Immigration boomed between 1880 and 1920. Over 20 million immigrants arrived in the United States, primarily from Southern and Eastern Europe. These newcomers brought diverse cultures, languages, and traditions but also faced discrimination and hostility. Organizations like the Know Nothing Party and laws like the Chinese Exclusion Act, 1882, reflected nativist backlash against immigrants. Social and cultural changes. Immigrants and urban workers played a vital role in shaping American culture, contributing to art, music, cuisine, and labor movements. However, the rapid influx of newcomers also created tensions over cultural assimilation and economic competition. The Gilded Age and the Progressive Era. This era saw immense wealth concentrated in the hands of industrial magnates but also sparked movements for social reform and workers' rights. The Gilded Age. The late 19th century was dubbed the Gilded Age, a term coined by Mark Twain to highlight the stark contrast between the glittering wealth of industrialists and the struggles of the working class. Industrial titans, figures like John D. Rockefeller, Standard Oil, and J.P. Morgan, banking, amassed unprecedented wealth, often using controversial business practices like monopolies and trusts. Economic inequality. While the rich enjoyed lavish lifestyles, many workers faced low wages, long hours, and dangerous working conditions. The Progressive Era. In response to these inequalities, the progressive movement emerged in the early 20th century, advocating for social and political reforms. Labor movements, unions like the American Federation of Labor, AFL, fought for workers' rights, including better wages, shorter work hours, and safer working conditions. Strikes like the Pullman strike, 1894, highlighted the growing power of organized labor. Social reforms. Progressive reformers addressed issues like child labor, public health, and housing conditions. Activists like Jane Addams founded settlement houses like Hull House to support poor urban communities. Political reforms. Efforts were made to reduce corruption and increase government accountability through measures like the direct election of senators, 17th Amendment, and women's suffrage campaigns. A nation transformed. The industrialization and expansion period saw the United States evolve into a modern, industrialized society. It was a time of incredible innovation and opportunity but also inequality and unrest. The challenges and reforms of this era laid the groundwork for future progress and helped shape the U.S. into a global economic and cultural leader. World Wars and the Great Depression, 1914–1945. The period between 1914 and 1945 was defined by two world wars and the Great Depression, events that reshaped the United States both domestically and on the world stage. The U.S. emerged from these crises as a global superpower, but not without significant social, political, and economic challenges. U.S. entry into World War I and its impact. World War I, 1914–1918, initially saw the United States maintain a stance of neutrality. However, several key events pushed the U.S. into the war. In 1917, unrestricted submarine warfare. German submarines attacked American and Allied ships, most notably the sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, killing 128 Americans. This act, along with Germany's declaration of unrestricted submarine warfare, angered the U.S. and contributed to its decision to enter the war. The Zimmermann telegram, a secret message from Germany to Mexico promising to help Mexico regain territory lost to the U.S. Texas, Arizona, and New Mexico, if it joined the war against the U.S., was intercepted by British intelligence. This further escalated tensions and helped convince the American public and government to declare war. U.S. impact on the war. The U.S. provided crucial military and economic support to the Allied powers, tipping the balance of power in favor of Britain, France, and Russia. The American Expeditionary Forces, led by General John J. Pershing, played the key role in major battles like the Second Battle of the Marne and Meuse-Argonne Offensive, leading to the eventual defeat of Germany. After the war, President Woodrow Wilson proposed the 14 points, advocating for a lasting peace and the establishment of the League of Nations. However, the U.S. did not join the League, and the war's aftermath left deep economic and political effects on the U.S. and the world. The Roaring Twenties, economic boom and cultural shifts. The 1920s, often called the Roaring Twenties, was a decade of significant social change, economic prosperity, and cultural transformation in the U.S. Economic boom. The economy boomed during the 1920s, thanks in part to innovations in mass production and the widespread use of the automobile, especially by companies like Ford. The stock market soared, and consumer goods became more accessible, leading to the rise of a consumer-driven economy. Cultural shifts. The decade saw dramatic changes in American culture, especially in cities. The Harlem Renaissance, centered in New York City, brought African American culture, art, and music, such as jazz, to the forefront. Figures like Langston Hughes and Duke Ellington became iconic symbols of this cultural awakening. Women's rights. The 1920s also witnessed the emergence of the flapper, a symbol of women's newfound independence. The 19th Amendment, 1920, granted women the right to vote, marking a significant victory in the fight for women's equality. Prohibition. The 18th Amendment, 1919, prohibited alcohol, leading to the rise of illegal activities such as bootlegging and speakeasies, which became a significant part of American urban life during this time. The Great Depression, 1929, and FDR's New Deal. The optimism of the 1920s came to a halt with the Great Depression, which began with the stock market crash of October 29, 1929, known as Black Tuesday. The economic collapse led to widespread unemployment, poverty, and social unrest. Causes of the Great Depression. The Great Depression was caused by a variety of factors, including over-speculation in the stock market, leading to a bubble that eventually burst, the collapse of banks, which wiped out savings for millions, declining international trade and agricultural overproduction. Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt, FDR, became president and introduced a series of programs aimed at providing relief, recovery, and reform to the American people, collectively known as the New Deal. Major components included: the Social Security Act, 1935, provided financial assistance to the elderly and unemployed. The Civilian Conservation Corps, CCC, created jobs for young men in public works projects like building parks and roads. The Wagner Act, 1935, supported labor unions and workers' rights. The Tennessee Valley Authority, TVA, created jobs and provided electricity to rural areas. While the New Deal did not fully end the Great Depression, it helped provide relief and laid the groundwork for future social programs. U.S. leadership in World War II, Pearl Harbor, D-Day, and victory over Axis powers. World War II, 1939–1945, would reshape Th.